So this clip took us from a very brief introduction to a new character whose name is Shooter. And he's the drunk, the town drunk.
Get the money back.
We'll see more of him as the movie goes on. But we also just witnessed two pivotal moments in the movie. The first one was with Jimmy on the outdoor basketball field. The next was the dressing down of the town by Coach Dale. What did you think about the conversation? It really wasn't a conversation. What Dale said to Jimmy on that dirt basketball court. What do you think about that? What did you hear?
He gave him back his right to choose what to do with his own talent.
He did. He identified it. And then he said,
I don't care if you play on the team, that's up.
And before he said that, what did he do? He went through several things.
It's not the town.
It's not the towns.
It's not Myra Fleeners.
It's not Myra Fleeners.
It's not the schools.
It's not the schools. It's not the teams. And it's not mine. It's yours. That you just witnessed the very definition of leadership.
And also, he had not missed the basket.
No, he didn't. That's right.
Until the last one, when he said, it's yours. And then he missed the basket.
Right. What do you make of that? When that kind of thing happens in a movie, there's a reason. It's one of those things where anyone can interpret what it means, because who knows what it means.
Trying to make everybody else happy, and then when he had the choice, he missed it.
Yeah.
Because he was thinking about it.
Tuning out, tuning out, tuning out. One thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened?
So do you think it was kind of a revelation to Jimmy?
It was.
Yes.
That he had never even thought about his talent as belonging to him. And remember what I said before, that I imagine, as I said from last week, or the week before, whatever, I imagine that Jimmy was stuck in the middle, not knowing who to please, not knowing what's my responsibility. Should I please the town? Should I please Myra Fleener? Those interests are conflicting.
Yeah.
So no matter what I do, I'm going to disappoint somebody.
I want to know how many takes it took for him to...
You know, if you go to IMDb and look up this movie in the Internet Movie Database, these kids, with the exception of one, never been in anything else. This is all they ever did.
Is that right?
Because they were basketball players in high school. David Niedorf went on, and he was in Platoon. Briefly, he was a very minor character in Platoon who ends up getting injured in that first part of the movie. He gets wounded. But anyway, and I don't remember seeing him after that. But all right, so
What amazed me is he was making all those baskets with a cold, semi-flat basketball.
well, I don't know if it was semi-flat or whether it was just because it was dirt. It was the dirt thing, just not giving it anything to bounce off of. All right, so what we just witnessed was someone identifying and naming what belongs to somebody else. And that, as it turns out, was a revelation. He misses the basket. And we're also going to discover that it was empowering. That he was finally empowered to make a decision without regard to who I'm pleasing, because it isn't his job to please other people. Then the next, let's not gloss over the exchange between Myra Fleener and Coach Dale immediately after that. What did you think of that conversation? How did that strike you?
Sounds like she's having a change of heart.
She's having a change of heart?
No.
How so? No. People don't agree with you.
Okay, so at first she was kind of mean to him, and now she's telling him, you know, nicely, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do.
She's keeping that southern hospitality going. She's trying to be firm, but sounding all pleasing, but she's not pleasing at all. She's laying it down. I don't want you talking to Jimmy. Don't go near him. He's mine.
So it struck me as further Myra once again trying to claim things that belong to her that don't really belong to her. He doesn't necessarily press the point, though. Do you find what his responses to her? What do you think about how he responded to her?
As far as him talking to Jimmy, I think he said his piece and was done. He doesn't need to go near Jimmy again. So he could easily say, yeah, I won't talk to him again unless, you know, he comes to me, and be quite honest about the fact that he doesn't need to talk to Jimmy anymore. He's said it all.
Unless he's thinking that he probably feels that he is what she thinks he is. He did fail in what he was doing.
Coach Dale?
Yeah.
That he has some sort of past?
Yes. And he did fall, sort of, from where he was. And that, she feels as though he's trying to make up for something. No, she doesn't want Jimmy to have to come to that realization and try to make up for something that, you know, the game failed him in.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of like pass the buck, you know what, no, I failed, and this is why I failed, and I don't want you to fail for the same reason.
Well, let's sort of, because I've seen this movie so many times, I can recap the conversation. So she tells him to stay away from Jimmy, right? If it were me, I would certainly be tempted to say, oh, well, you don't understand what I was saying to Jimmy. You didn't hear. Let me tell you what I was telling him, because that might make you more comfortable. But he doesn't do that, which I find fascinating. He does not try to explain himself to her when he could have.
It's not her business.
It's not her business. It doesn't belong to her. And the conversation goes back and forth about, you know, gods and being basketball scholarships and whatnot. And she says, I know men like you. And he says, you don't know anything about me. And she says, well, I know you're here. And I know this town doesn't appear on most maps. So a man your age is either running away from something, or he has nowhere else to go. And he says, why I'm here has nothing to do with you. He doesn't deny, he doesn't defend, he doesn't get defensive, which also I find fascinating, because normally when someone skirts too close to the truth, and we are trying to hide something, we can get defensive. But he simply says that, you know, whatever the reasons are, they have nothing to do with you. Now, she doesn't agree with that. Okay, she thinks it has something to do with her. And I think that, or let me ask you this: do you think that she believes she's righteous in her position? I don't mean self-righteous, but that she's in the right, that she's doing right. Do you think that she believes that? Yeah.
As far as, yeah,
Right. Yeah.
as far as Jimmy goes.
Sure.
She's right because she wants to make sure that he gets a good education and doesn't get stuck in this basketball mess that seems like the whole town men are stuck in.
Right. Right. Now, that raises an interesting question. It's difficult to answer. How do we identify what belongs to us and what doesn't belong to us? How do we do that? Because is it just a matter of perception? I believe that this belongs to me and I don't care whether you agree with me or not? Because, when you look at it from Coach Dale's point of view, that's kind of his attitude. This is the way it is. This is what belongs to me. This is what belongs to you. You don't agree with it? Tough. Okay, how do we identify what belongs to whom? There's no easy answer to that question, which is why these kind...
It's hard for something that belongs to you.
Yeah, so she works hard as a teacher.
Right.
She probably has worked hard to look out for Jimmy. So understandably, she believes that she has ownership of some kind over Jimmy.
But she's misconstruing her ownership. She can only give him the information. She owns the information so far as she's giving it and letting it go. He has to take ownership and say, okay, I've got your information, you've given it to me, it's now mine to assimilate or to throw away.
You're talking about Jimmy?
Yes.
Yeah.
As far as, because she's trying to claim ownership of him and his scholarly ability to get into a school, as opposed to his basketball ability.
Right.
She thinks Coach Dale is trying to take Jimmy away from her and get him into college sports scholarship, as opposed to us. She thinks the academic scholarship is better than the sports scholarship and will do him better. When, does it matter which scholarship he gets so long as he goes to college and does something he enjoys?
Well, I think she was also concerned that he couldn't get a sports scholarship because no one would ever see him. If the team didn't do well, then no one would ever see him. He would never get a sports scholarship.
That's
because
up
no
to
one knew he
the,
existed.
that's up to the coach to call and say, hey,
But I think that was her
touchdown,
concern.
can you
I
come
don't
check
think
it
it
out?
was. Her concern was the only chance he had was the academic scholarship.
Say that again, what?
I think her concern was that his only chance was the academic scholarship and that he wouldn't have a chance for the sports one.
Could be. Yeah, could be.
Because the town is so small,
Could be.
it doesn't show up on maps, nobody's going to come looking for talent here.
And the thing I would point out is to try not to impute malicious motives in her. I don't think she's being malicious with Jimmy
No, she wants
per se.
best.
She wants what's best for Jimmy. And to play devil's advocate and to take her point of view for a second, I've been a parent. Is a 17-year-old able to say what they own and what they don't own? And when we step back and look at the movie as observers, it's easier for us to say, well, maybe not. Obviously, Coach Dale has taken a very different position than Myra Fleener with regard to Jimmy's skill set as a basketball player. I don't think we should we necessarily should try to infer other things about Coach Dale in terms of what does and doesn't belong to Jimmy. I think that it's just the fact that he plays basketball really well, that belongs to Jimmy. But both of them believe they're correct. And that's the rub.
Well, Coach believes he's correct in his opinion of Jimmy. Jimmy has his own talent. It's Jimmy's. Jimmy needs to make the decision. Myra Fleener, her opinion that she thinks is correct.
Right,
And
right.
that she knows Jimmy. She knows best for Jimmy.
Right.
She should make all his answers.
Right.
And Coach is saying he needs to make his own choices. She's saying he's incapable of making his own choices.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why she's taking that is, didn't one of his parents die?
Both of them are parents.
Both of his parents?
Yeah, both of, I don't remember, one died or, they're both gone in any case.
So she's taking responsibility because she's an adult, and he has no adult
Right.
within him.
And she's a teacher, so there's
she's
that
taking-
authority.
Yeah, she's taking that authority because the town is pushing him
Right,
to play
right.
basketball, and nobody's pushing him to study and be something
Right.
other than a basketball player.
So we've got two people who both are convinced that they are right in their position. Myra Fleener's way of communicating whether she's right or not, and Coach Dale's way of communicating he's right, or, you know, they're both in so many words saying that their point of view is correct. But do you see any difference in the way they're both communicating it?
I know men like you. She's using a lot of,
So there's blaming and there's attacking.
and he's
Right, yes,
And he's taking ownership and saying, and putting the line, putting the boundary. This is not your concern, this does not belong to you.
right.
He's not blaming, he's just delineating.
He's defining himself, being clear about what he believes, but he's not using the same language.
He's not defensive.
He's not defensive, which is idealistic as far as the movie's concerned, and because most of us don't operate that way. But it's part of the learning process of understanding how we behave in these kinds of situations can make all the difference in terms of ultimate outcomes. And when things get confrontational like this, and when I say confrontational, where you've got one person saying you, the real question then is Coach Dale going to just sort of brush her aside like he does George and say she's hopeless? Or will he try to stay in relationship with her in spite of a massive disagreement? This is no small thing. Massive disagreement. And will he try to remain connected to her as the movie goes on?
I think the coach is trying to teach him, you're not gonna be in high school forever. You need to learn to make your own decisions.
Well,
No, right now, you're in high school, but you also need to learn to make your own decisions, what you want to do with your life.
well, I also think that, is George one of the teachers at the school?
George was the guy who was trying to take over as coach.
Okay, so he doesn't have a proximity relationship because
No, he does not.
School with him.
That's right.
So
That's right.
he has a need to keep her in working relationship, as opposed to George, who's not in the school and not in his near everyday
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of that
Yep.
in play too. You're going to need to try and work out a relationship with a coworker more than somebody who you're going to see.
Who's out in the wings in the periphery and
Yeah.
Yeah, the first thing he said to Jimmy was, "You weren't in class." So,
anything you want to tell me about?
yeah, so he skipped class.
Yeah.
So maybe Jimmy's in one of his classes also. so-
Yeah, he's-
Well, yes, that obviously
yeah.
is a way for the writers to tell us that there is this relationship as teacher-student.
Okay.
And so, he goes to Jimmy under that umbrella, which is legitimate, but he isn't really going because he skipped class, it's a way for him to have an excuse to go talk to him, a legitimate one,
Yep.
but to do what he thinks he needs to do. He's heard everything he needs to know about Jimmy from everybody else, except Jimmy.
And Jimmy still has.
And he wants to hear from Jimmy and invites Jimmy to say something, but he doesn't. So,
Because Jimmy doesn't know if he can trust him or not.
sure, I mean, who knows? I mean, Jimmy is like a rubber band in this whole thing. He's being stretched in every little different direction by people. And yeah, you're right.
Just let me alone, let me play ball.
Yeah,
I want to play ball.
He does become a pivotal character as time goes on.
Assumed lost both of his parents, and everybody's trying to tell him what to do. what to
Right,
do.
right. Okay. Go ahead.
Probably wants to play basketball.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he definitely wants to play basketball.
Yeah. Ball in his hand, throwing it to the basket.
No, and when they went into, when they were having the assembly, and they're all chanting, "We want Jimmy, we want Jimmy," and he said, he's telling them, "This is your team.
Right.
This is not Jimmy, this is your team."
That's right.
And they all started crying because they didn't know what to say.
In his speech to the thing, I don't think he said the name Jimmy once. He said, "This is your team. You need to respect and hold them
Yeah.
up and do whatever to help cheer them on." And, you know,
I would hope that you would support who we are and not who we are not.
Right.
so he didn't even say Jimmy's name. He said, "This
Right.
is us. This is
Right.
the team you need to support."
Exactly.
Yep. So, to set the stage for our fable this morning, we've got people who have feelings about Jimmy. We've got Myra Fleener, who has feelings about Jimmy. We've got the town that has feelings about Jimmy. And that raises the question of, are we responsible for other people's feelings? Which brings us to our fable. Okay? When little John was about a year old, his parents noticed very thin fibers protruding through his pores. After another few months, the fibers had extended themselves. They began to form curls. The condition alarmed his parents, so they took little John to a doctor. The physician, after examining him carefully, called in several specialists. They, in turn, summoned their colleagues and, after conferring for several hours, announced, little John was unique in medical history. His ganglia were growing outside his skin.
What's that?
Bundles of nerves.
Bundles of nerves, yes. They were, instead of being inside of his body, they were outside of his body. Since there was no record of this having happened before, it was not clear what the ultimate effects of such a condition would be. And since little John was otherwise in excellent health, it was decided to do nothing for a while but observe. Of course, one immediate problem was little John's rapidly developing extreme sensitivity to everything and everyone around him. The doctors alerted his parents, warning them that they must be super sensitive to his every move and touch. Being very sensitive people anyway, they readily agreed. As little John grew, so did his ganglia until they trailed about him as he walked. While it was not a pretty sight, surprisingly, it turned out to have some advantages. He learned from the very beginning, for example, first from his ever-concerned parents and then from others, that he could always count on someone watching out for him. Indeed, he learned early in life that anyone who came into his orbit would always pay attention to his every move for fear of hurting him. He found that he could plow through a path through any group of friends by just walking toward them. People would always retreat at his advance for fear of stepping on his feelings. When he engaged in sports or when he just wanted to be first in line, all he had to do was start in the direction he chose, and his approach itself proved to be an open sesame. Sometimes he encountered people who had not been forewarned about his condition, and then he had to point it out as early in their relationship as possible. Once they understood, however, they never tried to get in his way. All of this is not to say that individuals never felt resentment toward little John. Some of his classmates, and one of his brothers in particular, who were most competitive with him for certain goals, felt handicapped by his handicap, but they never spoke it aloud. All managed to quiet their resentment with self-recriminations about their own insensitivity. And so it went. Little John graduated high school, having done fewer homework assignments than any other child who ever attended, and he obtained a secure job, though less qualified than most of those seeking the same position. One day he met a woman whom he liked. Being extremely shy and not having enough confidence or experience to refute her own poor image of herself, she was thrilled at the advances of this very attentive, if somewhat strange, creature. She treated him with the utmost deference, and her pity soon became love. Everywhere they went, she watched out for him. In time, the guiding principle of her life became, how can I help this man avoid pain? But after they had been married a while, she began to tire. Still, she tried, for this poor man could not help himself. But it became increasingly difficult for her to be constantly mindful of his needs. She decided to confess her increasing insensitivity to her friends. She mentioned it to her family, to her minister, to her doctor. She sought professional help. All comforted her and sympathized, but could offer little practical advice, and so they urged her to be more patient. She tried again to shape her existence to his needs. Then the headaches started, then the little tick in one eye. Soon she found she was losing weight. Colitis further restricted her freedom, and it was not long before her thoughts were bordering on suicide. She dared not tell little John, of course, for fear of hurting him. Why, if he knew all of this was due to his condition, he would be inconsolable. One day as she was walking home, she chanced upon a mother cat giving suck to her newborn kittens. As they scrambled over one another in their thirst, the mother carefully guided each one to its turn, stretching out a firm but gentle paw as she lay contentedly on her side. Then Little John's wife noticed that one of the kittens had been born lame. Its leg had not been fully formed, and it had more difficulty maneuvering than the others. Strangely, it was also the most aggressive. While the other kittens, when satisfied, went off to sleep, this one kept coming back to wiggle its way in front of thirsty others. Each time, however, the mother cat pushed it away, at first gently, and then with successively harder whacks. Little John's wife watched the poor kitty and the inhuman mother. But when she returned home, upon finding her husband reading in a room, she planted herself in the doorway and began to stare. A little while later, Little John, desiring to enter another room, marched straight for the doorway that framed his wife. She did not budge. Closer he came, closer, never thinking actually to ask her to move. After all, he had never had to ask anyone to get out of his way before. Suddenly he stopped, confused. What should he do? First he assumed his most wounded look. Then he tried one that was more winsome and boyish, but his wife was like a rock. In desperation, he finally spoke. Move! You know I cannot squeeze by. Nothing. What's the matter with you? He yelled. What are you trying to do to me? This is like a trap. Then she began to move, not aside, but rather directly toward him. He retreated. She continued on. He moved back faster, but still on she came. Soon he was cornered. Have you lost your mind? He said incredulously. Careful there, you almost hurt me, he said pathetically. That did it. She raised a foot and stomp. With all her might, she came down hard on one of his trailing nerve endings. He screeched, either from pain or shock. Again she stomped, and again and again. He ran past her, but she pursued. He screeched again, and the scream encouraged her more. Stomp, stomp, she continued, chasing him from room to room, up and down stairs, to the cellar, to the attic, through the kitchen, to their bedroom, until exhausted they both collapsed and fell asleep. When Little John's wife awoke, her headache was gone for the first time in months. Her eye, too, had lost its quiver, and for the first time in a very long time, she sighed without a pain and felt relaxed. But more astounding still was what she saw beside her. For when she looked over at Little John, she found that his ganglia were no longer curled around him all about the floor. On closer examination, she realized that they had disappeared altogether. In fact, they had completely recoiled. inside his skin.
That must have been one fight to see her doing that.
So who's nervous about stuff?
Eddie,
What?
I said, that's how I get rid of my headaches.
And I said, who's nervous?
He's stomping on Eddie's ganglia.
Oh, it said so right there.
Oh my goodness. A lot of, by the way, a lot of Edwin Friedman's, I don't think this is true of the fables, but in his books, he tells real stories about this kind of stuff. Obviously not trailing gangula, but the kind of thing where people use their feelings basically to manipulate everyone around them. So how would you get this man to take responsibility for his own feelings?
Oh, I don't know. I highlighted the line where it says some of his classmates and one of his brothers in particular felt handicapped by his handicap. So this thing that made him needy was making everybody else unable to do what they needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting, that somebody else's handicap could do that to somebody else.
I mean, we could transfer, we could replace ganglia and feelings with a handicap or an addiction. You can replace it with any number of things and begin to ask the same kind of questions. How do you, another way of putting it would be, how do you get someone else to take responsibility for their own life? Okay, or how do you get someone to take responsibility for their own feelings?
Well, it started at an early age. He was like a year old, so they probably started protecting him before that.
So getting someone else like that to take responsibility is going to be difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to point anything out, but, say Kimberly, if you don't allow her to do something, she's going to end up like a little girl.
Maybe.
So I'm just saying like a baby.
Let's not get too personal.
He's a year old. Little John was a year old, so they were protecting him. They weren't allowing him to do anything because they were protecting him.
If you take a child that is having trouble dealing with their emotions and teach them tricks, tools, whatever you want to call them, if you're feeling this way, you should go talk to somebody, or you got to give them tools so that they can work through it, especially when they're very young. You have to practice those tools with them, because otherwise they're not going to know how to use it when the emotion arises.
Temper tantrum.
That's what I'm saying. Apparently they didn't allow little John to do any of that. So, they did everything for him. So now, as he's grown up, he's thinking, well, everybody's got to do for me because, be careful of me because I am me. I am little John. I am me. So everybody needs to protect me.
I think, going back to what we were saying with the movie, I think it's tough because I think people, when you're enabling somebody to realize that you think you're doing the right thing, you think you're trying to help them. Yeah, it's hard, it's easy to get sucked into that and not realize that you're...
Go back to the bridge. The parents were the person holding the rope on the bridge while the little Johnny's the guy hanging over the water. They never let go. His plate finally let go, he hit the water, felt some pain, and said, okay, I gotta figure this out.
This diagram is called a feedback loop, okay? And this is the most simple way to picture one. And each arrow is, in essence, saying an action that I'm doing is an attempt to affect something else in someone else. And so the wife is desiring to rescue John from pain. And so what we've seen is around and around and around it goes, because her attempts to rescue John from pain do what to her? Give her headaches and pain. So basically it doesn't work. Okay? It doesn't work. So The wife's approach was pretty violent. But so normally it isn't quite like that. But Ed Friedman does show us something about what happens when you start changing your behavior. So the wife takes a completely different tact. Now she's not only not going to rescue him from pain, she's going to cause pain. Okay? But it doesn't immediately work.
He runs away.
He runs away. And the thing is, when we change our behavior in these kinds of feedback loops, there's a delay in the results.
Okay.
So you try something, and in this case, what we get are temper tantrums. And so it kind of continues to go along like that with temper tantrums. And this is just simply to point out that there's always going to be a delay in what you're doing. And the danger with the delay is ending too soon. Caving in. All right? So classic parental situation with the the terrible twos, okay? And the temper tantrums. And, at least for me, it's, all right, make sure the 2-year-old is safe, that he or she can't hurt himself or herself, and then walk away. and just let them go. As opposed to trying to rescue. Now, other parents may do it differently. And I'm not saying that one is necessarily right or wrong. It's just an easy example to point out, because you know that if you try to deal with the temper tantrum really quickly, you might solve the temper tantrum. You might. It might go away.
I want a lollipop, I want a lollipop.
Right. So, but then if you say, here's your lollipop, okay. Peace at any price. Silence is golden. Kind of thing. And then what happens the next time the kid wants a lollipop? Or the next time the kid wants anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So you've got to have the wherewithal to deal with this. Do you see a connection between this and Hoosiers?
Yep. The town wants Johnny.
The town wants Johnny. What do you think was going on in the gym?
They were having
a temper tantrum. You're doggone right they were having a temper tantrum.
We want Johnny.
Right.
Jimmy.
Right, they want Jimmy.
There was being a parent say, well, you're not getting what you want.
That's right. That's exactly right. And how exasperating is that when you have to look at a whole group of people? Some of them are kids, but I'm not sure it's the kids. I don't know who started the yelling of "We want Jimmy, we want Jimmy," but it was probably the adults.
Well, the kids are doing what the adults too have been telling them at home, Mm-hmm. They're just going by what their parents want. I'm sure the kids want that too, because that's their school. So, the kids want it, the adults want it.
Right.
Monkey see, monkey do.
So let me just point out a real life thing that's going on right now at Christ Church. And this is not a bad thing. It's just pointing out how this works. So, over a year ago, the vestry and I confessed to each other our frustration over stewardship and just our exasperation over stewardship. And what can we do differently? Because we've always done stewardship the way we've always done stewardship.
Stewardship is frustrating.
Maybe that's the case, okay? Maybe it doesn't matter what we do. So I began to think about, well, what do I know? And I know that we've done stewardship like this for decades. You know, when I say like this, I mean, you know, a program with pledge cards and all that kind of stuff. And if the result of a stewardship program is to get the money and to at least lower the anxiety of the leadership, it doesn't work. Okay? It doesn't get the money, and it doesn't lower the anxiety of the leadership, because year after year after year after year, we go through the same stuff over and over and over and over and over again. So last year, we decided, let's do this Living Generously video stuff, and let's just take a different approach to this. And this year, we decided, and people are having second thoughts about this, to not push pledge cards or have a commitment Sunday like we've always done. And I will confess to my own sense of nakedness that here it is in October, the end of October, and I'm asking myself, am I doing the right thing? Is this what we should be doing? What if no one gives? What if no one makes pledges? And I'm what-ifing myself to death, but I'm saying to myself, okay, we got to go through it. So we've got the delay. Okay. And in the meantime, of course, we've got anxiety. Is it going to work? Or is it not only not going to work, is it going to be detrimental? It could be. I mean, I don't know. So the thing, though, is that when we start to feel pain, to go back to John, we start to feel pain. The temptation, of course, is to revert back to the old behavior, because at least that way we're doing something and now we feel better. Oh, okay, that feels better. But it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. The only way to change something is to, change it. And to change it, to introduce change, is likely in the short term to increase anxiety and to increase our sense of pain, which creates this sense of delay and questioning whether it works. And then now the question is, do we hang in there? And so you know, this is I'm with the vestry in terms of feeling anxious about it and worried about it. And I also feel like it would be so easy to just go back and do what we've always done. Man, that would be easy. Let's just do that.
You always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got.
You know, and we have these sayings like that, don't we? And they're easier to say. They're really easy to say. Because it's the truth. Right. So I'm finding myself, you know, saying to the vestry that exact same thing. We need to hang in there because it's too early. It's too early to say it's failed. It hasn't even happened yet. Okay, it hadn't even happened yet. So that's an example, and I think that the vestry is handling it very, very well in the sense of people are saying that they're anxious, and people are, you know, being upfront about it, which is a good thing. Okay? All right, I got to stop. It's 5 minutes after 10. See you next week. Sorry, we don't have time.